Good morning. Welcome to today's webinar. We're going to talk about VDC coordination from a general contractor perspective. We have the presence of Laura Heniak, a senior VDC coordinator and BIM process manager with Clancy and Days Construction Company. Laura has led the implementation of technology in building design and construction for over 15 years in a variety of roles. She brings her design perspective as a registered architect into her current work, which focuses on coordination building system models prior to installation for work of the construction site. Welcome. Thank you, Laura, for making time for this, for us, for joining our weekly webinars. So tell us more about yourself. What is your background, education, and where is your career taking you, and how did technology weave in that?
Sure, I'm actually going to start sharing my screen here because I'm going to hit on that right away and then I'll have some info to show you.
Okay.
So let me get this pulled up here. Sure I
Yeah.
get the right one. Okay, can you all see my screen?
Sure. Yes. It is there.
Perfect. Okay, so let me get through here. So like Luisa said a little bit about me, I am a registered architect working for a general contractor. So I've got about 15 years experience in the industry here, working on a wide range of project types. I've done a lot of multifamily mixed use, K through 12. I kind of dabbled in healthcare, senior living. I've always been interested in how technology can really help us make more
Mhm.
collaborative environments for these collaborative project teams. I think that's where having that architect background, now that I'm working in construction, also helps because I'm always trying to kind of bridge that gap too. I also always like to tell this story. When I first started my career, I was on a path out of college to become a registered architect. On my third day at work, they asked if I wanted to use Revit, and I said, sure, why not? I was, young and interested in technology, and that really ended up changing my career path. So I still am, I eventually did get registered, but that led to implementing Revit within a pretty large firm, kind of being support staff for 2 to 3 years. I did just solid Revit support. So it was a really nice break in my career, and I've really enjoyed this path into virtual design and construction.
Yeah. Well, you were studying. Do you have any practice with some programs, or you learning after?
So when I was in college many years ago, I was introduced to 3D modeling probably in my second year of college. We were using a
Hmm.
software called I can't Form Z, which I don't even think is around anymore. Um, but just the concept, which at that time was still pretty new, of building 3D models, I could see how it just made it easier to understand things. And as a young
Hmm.
designer, I also found that by actually building things in Revit, you could see where gaps were that you might miss in drawings. So you might build a wall in a roof condition and the model and be like, whoa, how does this work? And that gives you the opportunity to then ask someone more experienced, like, okay, in reality, how would this work? And work through those
Hmm.
kind of details. So I think it does help that.
Yeah, I agree. The models are really helpful to explain what is going on the system and what are the changes that we have to make on. So
Hmm.
we're gonna talk about the VDC coordination,
Yep.
and you might give us a little context of how long does a job on a typical cleansing and day projects.
Sure. So I would say we spend, let's say, 4 to 6 months in coordination on a typical project. It
Hmm.
depends on the project size and scope. I mean, right now I'm working on a $170 million high school project. So
Okay.
that's been pretty involved. It's just a lot of square footage. It's a
Hmm.
really great design. And I found when you've got these really cool designs, it on coordination does take a little bit longer. So we are engaged with our project teams early on, usually right after contracts are signed, getting trade partners involved, and I'll talk about all that. One thing I won't talk about, I don't think is in this presentation, is with our public school work, we do constructability reviews and
Okay.
part of our model process. So we actually are involved during DD and CD phases to help take a look at the model and give the design team some items we flagged.
Okay. Impressive. No, thank you. So you can start with your presentation. So the
Sure.
stage is yours.
Thanks, Louisa. So I talked a little bit about me, a little bit about Clancy and Thays. We are headquartered here in Raleigh, which is where I'm located right now. We have 6 locations across the Southeast. Our newest office opened this year in upstate South Carolina. We're now at over 475 employees, so it's really exciting to be part of a company that is growing this much and is on the edge of technology. So in this presentation, it's titled kind of the General Contractors Coordination Workflow. I've actually broken this up into two parts. So today we're actually just going to talk about part one. And so this is how I think about the coordination process. The first step is we're going to gather info, model info, schedule info, that kind of thing. We'll then take that information and we'll start to really review the data. This is where we start to do our model reviews, really look at what's going on. Part two, which I'll be doing a webinar later on this year, is where we'll talk about how we are finding more specific issues and then how we're solving the problems. So the first step I'm going to talk about here is how we're gathering information. So when I get engaged on a project, the first thing I'm going to do is start to look at the drawings and specs, just get kind of an overall idea of what this project is like. I'll also start looking at the project schedule and milestones and really think about like our internal VDC staffing. How are we going to staff this project and get it coordinated? The first step, we do use ACC Build. I don't know if any of you out there are using this platform as well. But with Build, I have access to all of the sheets, which is nice. I got one place to look. I know where it's at. I'm probably going to start with like a civil drawing, just trying to get a general idea of what's going on with this project on the site. This example here is from a really tight urban project we are doing in Durham, North Carolina. The next step we've got, and this is specific to our mixed-use multifamily studio, is we've put together a matrix of really typical areas that we're going to coordinate and analyze, especially with this project type where we're not looking at the whole building, but we're looking at very specific spots. So we've gone through, and our operations team has worked with VDC to put this together so that we can work with our team, decide what subcontractors will be required at each of these areas during coordination, and then what you see on the right, this list is actually placed into our subcontractor's contract. So that way we have a contractual obligation from them to participate in the VDC coordination process. This also gives us the ability to talk with our operations and field staff to figure out if they've already identified any areas that we think we're really going to have to look at during coordination or things we want to focus on. We'll then take all that information and put together a schedule. This is one of our early examples where we're just trying to define what elements need to be populated at what time and when we need to submit drawings. We've started to expand this process. Here we're using Microsoft Project to more accurately kind of look at how long things are taking and kind of move this through the project. So when we do hit durations that might take a little longer, we can update the schedule. The key here is that our trade partners, know when deliverables are going to be due, and they can also manage their own staffing for how long the project as a whole is going to take. And with the amount of experience that we have here in our department, we can put together pretty accurate schedules based on our historical data. We also might ask our superintendents for input, like we see here, trying to figure out what subs need to be involved at what stage and any like start dates. This brings VDC. We don't just, I always like to say, we have here at Clancy and Thays have a really great relationship between our VDC department and our operations and field teams. And this just gives them a way to get involved in what we're doing. They sit in all of our weekly meetings. It's not just VDC in a little bubble. In projects where we are doing podium construction, where we're doing a lot of sleeving drawings, it's also helpful for us to like see what we've got here on the right for us to understand the pour schedule in VDC. That way, if we are working on a really tight schedule, we can, sequence our coordination to kind of go around and follow the pour dates. So I've got the basic info of the project. Now I'm going to get information from the designer models, which we do request. I actually had this question come up recently from an architect. We use the architectural models pretty much as is. We do verify elements, floors, ceilings. If we're using a model from a structural designer, we will go through and verify foundations. But we've got these models. We can look at it's really helpful if we get a Revit model with sheets and views, and I'll highlight that in a minute here. We're then going to take that, push it to all the platforms that we use. So we are using Navisworks. We're also using some Revisto. We're using ACC Build, lots of different spots to put it. And then, like I said, we will spot check these to make sure they're accurate. So this is an example here. I'm not going to be, I guess I am throwing out some specific product names, but I think I do want to focus on the process, but we've got one spot where we keep all of our designer models along with trade partner models. One of the nice things about a couple different platforms, here we're looking at Build, is that we can actually overlay 2D drawings on top of a model. So this is, I think it's helpful early on in a project when you're looking at a plan view. That way in a model, I know there's ways out there to do like 3D text blocks and things for rooms, but this is a way to just see the plan on the sheet and really quickly see where you're at in a model. We also have the ability using Revisto to actually do what's called export sheet coordinates. So the kind of caveat here with Build is that this is reliant on the sheet within the actual Revit model. With this workflow here with Revisto, we can export out what are called sheet coordinates. And that way it just knows where the sheet is in 3D space and can automatically align it. However, what we can do is we can actually upload the actual PDF from the drawing deliverable and use that to overlay. So we know that we're working with the contract documents, which is what we're coordinating against. So here's an example from a school project that I worked on where we were doing underground coordination. So we can see what's pink is electrical, so we can see some underground conduit. We've got some blue and gray underground, which is underground piping. And we were able to overlay the foundation plan on here. The nice thing about this is if we're trying to reference a detail, we can see the detail call out. We can also see foundation elevations and types. This is one way also to kind of verify that model data. And it just provides us with a really clear picture of what's going on. It might provide us more information than what is included within the model. We're also using ACC model coordination. So here's where we can actually pull all of those NWCs into one location. So we've got the designer models all together and we've done some checking of it, kind of spot checked to see what we're working with. Our next step, once we have subcontractors under contract, is to get their models. So we'll take a look at their modeling capability, we'll work through a BIM kickoff meeting, our BIM execution plan, and really think about how we're going to use this model data. So even before the BIM kickoff, we are going to send out this BIM questionnaire to our trade partners. This is a 2-page document, and within this, we can really glean a lot of good information that we're going to use in our kickoff meeting and in our BIM execution plan. So the first one, we ask for who's going to be involved in the project, and we want to make sure that in our coordination meetings, we don't just have a modeler, but we have other folks in there too. And it actually might all be the same person. It depends on the trade. But we want to ensure that we have a decision maker in the meeting, so someone that can actually make change, like give the okay to make changes. We want someone with field knowledge. We want to make sure that what we are modeling and coordinating is how the work is actually going to be installed in the field. And then we follow this same, like I said, the same practice within Clancy. So we have project managers and superintendents in these meetings as well, so that we can get all those same benefits we're asking of our trade partners. We'll also ask them to list the different authoring software that they're using. I mean, we get a lot of Revit, but there's also some out there using AutoCAD. Also, fire protection is often using an add-on to AutoCAD. So we want to make sure that everyone is compatible, as well as taking a look at the different modeling standards we're going to use. Are we going to do one model? Are we going to split it by floor? Are we going to have models split by systems? I think a lot of this is derived from the project type as well as the discipline. And then we'll take a look at how we can actually pull this all together with an origin point. And then the final step of this questionnaire is making sure that we can kind of hit the ground running for coordination. So asking our trade partner teams if there's anything else they need before they can start the actual coordination process. Is there some equipment information they need? Are there more CAD files we need from the design team? Also asking how much work they will prefabricate from the model, because that's going to kind of dictate how we work through coordination. So we're going to take all of this information from this questionnaire and then lead a BIM kickoff meeting. So the goal of this BIM kickoff meeting is to have, all of the parties who will be involved in our model coordination, and that's typically mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and fire protection trades. We may also have concrete and steel, depending on the scope of work, and then our operations and field teams. So in this BIM kickoff meeting, it gives us the chance to meet everyone. We run these meetings virtually. In the past, we did some hybrid meetings because we are often working with remote modelers for one or two trades. I actually find it a little bit easier when we're doing all virtual. That way, no one's at an advantage or disadvantage of not being in the room. And we find that we can run meetings really efficiently this way too. In this kickoff, we'll talk about a review of our C&T BIM coordination process, which is honestly kind of what this presentation is talking about. And then we'll get into the project specifically. So we'll take a look at that building layout. That matrix I showed earlier on, there we've already kind of maybe identified some spots we need to look at. So we might open up the model and take a look at some areas to make sure everyone's aware that we're really going to need to focus in on these spots. And then take a look at that other stuff we talked about, our platforms, and then really establish a good coordination schedule. This kickoff meeting, we're also going to be filling in our BIM execution plan, which then we'll have trades sign off on after the meeting. One of the biggest things here is how are we going to use this model? In just about every project, obviously we're doing 3D coordination, but then is there going to be any 3D control derived from the model? Are they going to be fabricating from the model? So these are important things to know ahead of time so that we make sure we are working towards that goal. It also lets us know how fine-tuned we need to get. Like, are they actually going to be locating hangers based on model coordination for piping and duct? Then we want to make sure that we are really looking at those elements. So as we're getting closer to the actual coordination process, early on, like I said, with the designer models, we kind of like spot check it first. But now's the time where we actually do want to verify foundation, structure, and ceilings are really the big ones that we want to look at. So I do this a pretty old school way. I just have Revit open on one screen, Bluebeam open on the other. And in Revit, I'm going to use elevation tags to call out elevations of foundations. And then in Bluebeam, I'm going to highlight and make sure that they all match up. So this gives us the opportunity to see where there might be some discrepancies, which we do hit every once in a while. Generally, they're really accurate, but when we have found items to fix, it does make a difference, especially when we're doing underground coordination. Here's an example where we had a model from our concrete trade partner, as well as a model from our structural engineer. And I actually just did Clash and Navis here. And it basically, I wanted everything to show up as colored because they should theoretically all be clashing. But when I do have some items that are showing up in gray, what that tells me is our concrete trade partner, they modeled in some of these haunches that they would actually need to use to construct this thing. And that just kind of lets me see the detail level that they're going to. I'm also going to take a look at ceiling heights because clearly in overhead coordination, we want to make sure that the ceilings are accurate because that is what we are coordinating against. So here's an example of a project where we're able to call out things that just didn't quite make sense. Generally speaking, whatever is in the drawings rules. So if I see a case where there's a discrepancy between the model and the drawing, I will make some model modifications. I actually usually do that in my own model. Like I'll make a duplicate ceiling and modify it there. That way I'm not really touching the designer model. In this case, however, we found some discrepancies that just the ceiling height noted didn't really seem to make sense. So what we're able to do in VDC, and this is, I think, where that architecture background helps too, is we often put together sketches. I've got some later on in this presentation too. So here's an example where we're looking at ceiling heights, verifying the model against the documents, and we're able to show the design team some discrepancies we found so that they could provide us with some responses. These kind of reviews also help us identify maybe some missed documentation. We can see here on the right that metal ceiling panel height, it was never defined, like we couldn't find it on plans or in any sections or details. So it also helps our team as we're looking through these drawings to find this information. And because we're going to be looking at these models all together, we want to make sure that they're in the right location. So you can see here this little kind of like pie symbol. what we do is each trade puts this at the same location, which we have defined in our BIM execution plan. And then they all should match up like a pie like we see here. And because this gives us the opportunity to check both vertical, because they all meet at a point at the bottom, but also laterally and rotationally, because they should all match up. This is really important. I found it myself in a situation where I had a structural design model in like a foot too low, which I realized mid underground coordination. We were able to adjust it and make the adjustments necessary. But because we do get models from different sources, we all need to make sure that we're working in the same spot. So then it's like my triple check. I will actually do some spot elevations in all the different platforms I'm using, which I've got called out here, and then actually compare it to the drawing to make sure that everything is in the right spot. Okay, so that's that gathering info piece. And I'm also open to questions if anyone does have any questions throughout. I know there's a chat feature, Louisa. I don't know how you've been running these in the past, but I'm open to questions at any point too.
Yes, anyone that has a question, we can put it in the chat and I'll read them to you at the end of this presentation.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so we've got all of our information gathered together. And we have found a lot of support from our design teams. We do have designers involved in our coordination meetings, and I think that really helps. You know, at the beginning, I talked about how I think technology can really make our processes more collaborative, and I think that's one way we can do it. So we've got all of our information gathered. We've got models, we've got schedules, we've verified said models, and we've got it all in one place. The next step is we're actually going to review this information. So generally here at Clancy and Thays, we are not modeling trade partner content. That is either something the trade partner is doing internally or they are contracting out themselves. However, there are times where we might do some supplemental modeling, maybe site utility structures, overhead clearances, and either garage or retail like spaces where we're just doing core and shell. And we do, excuse me, we do fill in MEP gaps every once in a while. So this is a good example of how we do that supplemental modeling, and we can also do it early on. So this project is actually where our office is located here, actually where you see off to the right, that steel structure is where I'm sitting right now, or standing. But this project, we were looking at how the foundations, now that this is kind of a post picture, was going to be constructed. Because as you can see, this new garage we were building is very close to a property line and a garage on the adjacent side of that property line. We started excavating and realized there was a lot of rock. So our project management team engaged our VDC team to help take a better look at how we could make this foundation system work to try and reduce the amount of blasting. So the first thing we did is we had a surveyor go out and give us some points so that we could then model a very rough surface of what the rock elevations would be on this site. We then overlaid the structural model on top of that. We were able to provide a sheet with views, and we showed this to the owner and design team and said, this is what we're seeing based upon the information that we have. And everyone said, this is great. Like, what else can we do with this? How much further can we take this investigation? So we kind of took to the next step and ran Clash and then provided with some graphics, taking a look at how this would actually work, the depths that we needed for foundations. We put together a drawing to really clearly show where we had rock within 4 feet of the surface to really clearly illustrate where we would need to make some changes. And then provide more 3D data, giving a really rough calculated fill. So this was all done within our VDC team to help support the designers and owners make a decision with financial implications. We're then able to take all that information and put it into the model. So here's where we're layering multiple sources of information together. So not only do we have underneath here that rock surface that we modeled, we also went out and did a drone scan of the site, and using photogrammetry and point cloud, here we've got a point cloud, we're able to see what that actually looks like. And then inserted into this are the architectural and structural models. Here's a section, and you can see here where what's hatched in gray is that model that we built, and then that kind of brown line you can see is the point cloud, and you can see how they pretty much match up with what we expected. Another way that we're able to get engaged early on in part of underground coordination is we're doing a lot of work here in Raleigh with vibro piers that require this area of just around it that cannot be disturbed that you see in the earth hatch here. So what we do is we actually model those kind of trapezoid shapes to make sure that our underground systems won't interfere with them. So here's an example of a project where we're able to, what you see in pink is foundations where our plumbing trade partner had identified that he would be clashing with those zones at those locations. We were then able to have a meeting with our structural engineer and architect and go through kind of one by one and say, this is the elevation that we are proposing for this foundation in order to have systems run above them. This project, things were so tight that not only did we have the underground model of underground plumbing and underground conduit, we also had what you see like shaded in these blue boxes is trenching. Because it was so tight, we actually had to look at that too, which was really tricky to model. So we're able to really illustrate to the designers the problems that we're encountering. We also do a lot of modeling overhead. In this example, in a parking garage, that way we actually have geometry to clash against. So we want to make sure that we don't have any plumbing or fire protection dropping below the requirements of height. In this project here, we had a ducted exhaust in this garage. As you can see, the orange is showing that overhead clearance and the green is the duct below. This was a really clear way to show the designers like this is not going to work with what we've got here. And I've got some sketch examples later on. Just having that geometry makes it easier to show. We've also modeled in accessible routes to accessible spaces, modeling that height requirement is kind of like a mass for the route going from the entry to the accessible spot and back. This is an example where we might assist with some underground modeling. So in this case, we had a plumbing trade partner engaged. They did not yet have their sand filter modeled. So in order to kind of speed things up so that they could get it installed, as you can see in the sketch on the right, this sand filter was under the garage entry ramp. So it was pretty tight. So what we were able to do here in VDC is get that box modeled. You can see how the plumbing pipe doesn't quite match up with the outlet yet. That was something they were working on, but we were able to take the submitted information, get that modeled, get it situated so that it would fit under that ramp and give our field team that location. So all this stuff I've been talking about, at some point we've actually got to bring all these models together. So we've got a couple different ways to do that. For those of you familiar with ACC model coordination, that's one method. Navisworks is kind of the standard out there, and then finally Revisto. So here with ACC model coordination, kind of newest in the game, I see the real advantage here is that everyone uploads to one spot in the document management portion of ACC. That way, everything's in one spot right now. Well, historically, we'd been using glue, so it was like a separate place to go. There are some projects where I think it makes sense to use Revit files, but we have found that that kind of slows down the processing process, for lack of a better word. So here we are using NWC files. And the nice thing here is there is a web viewer. We have been using NWDs published from Navisworks and Revisto to give our field teams access. Here, this kind of makes it a little bit easier. There's still a step to get everyone access, but we still have everything in one place. So this is kind of the newest way that we're bringing things together. The advantage to this and things like Glue is that, everyone uploads their model, all trades, and it's Clancy and Thays. This is where we would upload designer models. We are then taking all those models and federating them into one, federated model. The advantage is that if Mechanical makes an update to their level 1 model and they upload the updated file to docs, then they've got it here in ACC model coordination, and everyone sees the update. So back, in other workflows with VDC, there might be a bottleneck at that like VDC coordinator position to actually get all the models into one spot and updated. This eliminates that. And I will say that ACC's web model viewer is great. It's the interface is getting there, but just the fact that anyone with a web browser can open the model irregardless of the power of the machine they're running, and no special software needed. They're also working on their web mobile viewer, which I think will really help this process too. So when we do engage Revisto, I think one of the things I like to mention here is that, everyone knows Navisworks. Our trade partners all have workflows in Navisworks. So we want to make sure that we're keeping this process kind of as flexible for everyone as possible. That way we get the engagement that we want from our trade partners. So we're either combining models in Glue or, like I said, in ACC model coordination, opening this in Navisworks, and now I'm able to actually export to Revisto. So that way I can keep that model updated here in Navis, so trades that want to use Navis are able to, but I'm able to do the workflows that I need to do within Revisto and just update that model on a regular basis. Right now we've got one project, that school I was talking about, where we actually are updating the Revisto model daily so that trades can always see the update. I mentioned the web model viewer being great for anyone to open the model. We've also found it helpful to give access to designers and owners. So in this case, we wanted to give the ownership team, the ability to see how mechanical unit sizes would affect their overhead space in these retail areas. So we gave them two different models with like two different options, but then you can see here we were able to set up viewpoints for these different areas of retail so they could really see what the difference was. So just another way to make things collaborative. Okay. So I realized some of the things I said were coming at the end will actually be coming soon in part 2. I really like to, I put together this presentation so that designers could really understand what we're doing within this coordination process. Working in architecture for a long time, I really thought I knew what contractors were doing. And then after working in this field for about a year, I was like, oh, wow, there's actually a lot that I didn't even know was going on behind the scenes, especially the areas that I just talked about. It's not just like you get a model and go. There actually are a lot of steps behind the scenes to make sure that everything we're looking at is accurate. And this doesn't even touch on the other things we can do with models, quantity takeoff, constructability reviews, all that kind of stuff. But really, the focus here is to make a collaborative environment for everyone so at the end of the day, we have a well-coordinated model and field installation goes smoothly.
Thank you, Laura. This is the time if you have any questions, so I can give it to Laura and she can answer some of them. I have some here. What do you see as the greatest VDC challenges that you have encountered, and how do you overcome it?
Okay, that's a good question.
Like some
I
of
think
your projects.
yeah, exactly. I could, talk all day about little things. So I think one of the biggest challenges, we just had a chat earlier, is kind of there's a fine line, but not a fine line. There's that line between what is typical coordination and when do we need to like wave the red flag and say we really need help from the design team here, so that we're not kind of getting to a point where then we really need the designers, but bringing them in a spot that's that is appropriate. So I think that's kind of one of those challenges is there's a lot of like lines here. So just figuring out when we do need to engage other folks. I think the other challenge would be we all know that project schedules are moving really quickly. I don't think it probably matters what market you're in. Um, so being able to have a coordination pace that can keep up with that. Like I mentioned early on, that's why we have that like pour schedule identified early on. So we're like,
Mhm.
okay, we know like what we've got to hit. Let's make sure that we can, get these sleeving drawings, not only the sleeving drawing done, but also reviewed by the structural engineer and then out to the field for use before the concrete's poured. So schedule is also a challenge sometimes.
Yeah. Is this a process that you use in every of your projects, or you have a different one for each one?
So the general things are the same in each project. Um, Here in our Raleigh office, coordination is a
Mhm.
standard on all of our projects, with the exception of some really small work we might not be engaged. But most projects we're engaged in some way. It might just be underground. Um, in mixed use multifamily work, we're doing underground coordination, and then overhead in like amenity and retail areas, and that might be it.
Mhm.
So that's where I think our scope is where it changes between different project types. But as a whole, we are engaged in some fashion um,
Okay.
in all of our work. In the, this presentation I'm talking about here, I'm only talking about coordination.
Mhm.
But every project uses some part of VDC, whether that's open space, 3D photo documentation that we use as a standard on all of our projects, or drones, whether we're just using it for like site progress, or we use that a lot early on too for site analysis. Um, we're using drones for QA/QC for concrete sleeving. So there's like a little bit of VDC everywhere. Once we get into more laser scanning, there's lots of ways that VDC is touching in some way all of our work.
Mhm. Talking about drones and photogrammetry, are there a team that is doing that in Cleansing Days, or you have to contract another company?
Yes, we have a team here at Clancy and Days. So my coworker here in Raleigh, Kyle Snyder, is leading up our drone program. We have drone pilots in all of our offices, and that's how we're kind of managing our fleet and making sure that every office has the opportunity to take advantage of the services that we can provide with our drone program.
Hmm. What are the difference that you see when you're doing drones laser scanning with the other one with the VTC?
Laser scanning, we're doing a lot of new construction work here in Raleigh.
Mhm.
Anyone in this market knows that that's what a lot of the market is right now. It's kind
Mhm.
of a new growing place. So I think probably in the near future, we'll see more opportunities for renovation work where we do get more heavily into laser scanning. I mean, I think one of the biggest things about scanning is I remember hearing about laser scanning, like 15 years ago, but at that point, it was so out of reach for everyone. Like it was just so expensive. Now it's getting a lot more in reach because there are smaller devices, that might not be as accurate, but get you where you need to be. The one use case we did here is we did a multifamily project that's actually on the same site as I'm at now, and there was a Publix grocery store on like the first floor. But there's so much plumbing coming from above and sanitary. It was double walled sanitary pipes, so it was really big, and we were able to go in after the fact, but before Publix started their upfit and actually do a laser scan and confirm that like what we had modeled in coordination was actually installed in the field. So I think that's one of the benefits of laser scanning and all the platforms we've got together, like working together now, is being able to actually do that field verification step in cases where things are really tight.
Yeah, you're right. Oh, how you're using VDC with clients, and have you seen that evolve in your practice over the last 10 years?
That's another good question. So yeah, I think VDC with clients, just the ability to take them through model walkthroughs. On our school projects is a standard we walk through with facilities. Like after we finish coordinating a specific area, we'll do a model walkthrough with facilities to make sure there's nothing that we missed that's not like a hard clash, geometry clash, or even like a installation method item that we would identify, but things to make sure that the building runs smoothly for them. That way there are no surprises when it's actually built. Like we can walk them through the model, show them, especially mechanical rooms where things might be tight, got some weird overhead clearances, we can walk them through those space. So that's one item. The other example I showed a few slides ago where, we're also able to take, even this is like a private owner, and show them, okay, this is your core and shell space for retail. This is the ceiling height we've got. We can make some changes, but this is what that would look like. So I think just trying to show them the different options of what's available. We also use VDC on a lot of our proposal work, which is obviously all very client facing. So that's a lot of work with our drones, open space, kind of the visualization aspect of it.
Yeah. So what are
Visual,
the other major benefits that have you seen in this industry with the new technology?
I think it can help us do things better that we, honestly, that like example I gave at the very beginning from early in my career where working on a building, if you saw like a weird wall and roof condition, you could ask for help on like what that would actually look like. Um, I think the fact that it helps us, from this side of where I'm at now in construction, get things installed more smoothly in the field. Like we don't catch 100% of the problems, but we often
Mhm.
catch the big ones so that it helps our teams work more effectively once they're out on site. And then the thing that I, always talk about, it can be more collaborative. When we had a coordination a few weeks ago on this school project I've been talking about, where we have the architect and mechanical engineer are in every call. And the one day we also had someone from the school facilities and school IT because we were talking about some cable tray, and we had everyone there and we were talking about the height of it and what we were worried about with like kids messing with it. And it was a perfect meeting. Like everyone was there, we were all sharing our ideas on what we could do. And I think that really goes to show, we sell that and we actually do it.
Yeah, you're right. I like storytelling when you're showing all the models and the
Hmm.
creations you can make. Yeah, you're right. Oh, do you have another like the second part that you want to share with us?
I was actually prepared to do the second part as a whole other presentation.
Yeah, yeah, we want
um,
to have the part two in another
yes.
webinar. But do you want to share like a trailer of it? Just
Oh,
like.
sure. So in part two, and this is a presentation that I've done many times. This obviously is targeted towards
Mhm.
designers, I guess maybe even owners too, to kind of go behind the scenes. So today I got into like the basic stuff, really before we get heavy into coordination. So part two is where we'll dive more into how we're actually finding the issues. Um, I don't do heavy clash detection to start because I find that you end up with these really long lists that are really painful to go through and identify. So we're doing a mix of like kind of heat map clash detection along with visual inspection and working with our trade partners and everyone's knowledge to kind of find those issues. And then how do we solve the problems? I think that's the big thing. Like anyone can run, I shouldn't say anyone, but lots of people can run clash detection. It's with like the couple clicks, but that doesn't really get you where you need to be. So how do we actually clearly flag those issues, and then how do we solve them? So I'll have some examples of how when we present a problem to a designer, we want to make sure that we have solutions in our back pocket. As a last resort, we'll always say, can we lower the ceiling? And sometimes that's what happens. We try to be thoughtful about that, or add a bulkhead, or whatever we need to do to get a system in. But we want to make sure that we are aware. We know what the designer is trying to do. That's where the architecture background comes in handy too. We know what the owner is trying to get. So how can we make these solutions that address those needs, and at the same time make the systems work? I think we sometimes forget, because ceilings are so covered up, how much is up there. Um, Even in when we're looking at mixed use multifamily work and in amenity spaces, there's a ton of stuff going on above ceiling. And those are typically like really high ceiling areas that have been sold. So how do we make solutions that are sensitive to everyone's needs? And at the end, like we want a good building, right? We want a building that people can use and people enjoy, and it functions as a building.
Yeah, you're right. Well, I certainly appreciate the time that you provided us today, and I look forward with part two into the next months. We'll get contact with you. And Laura, thank you so much for doing this. For those interested in the 2022 LOD specification, is out and is signing available and at Beamform Global /LOD. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.